Welcome back to MidEast In Depth, part of Levant TV's press review. Today we'll have a look at Lebanon through pieces in Al Monitor and the Daily Star, and later discuss some points with Carl. Haytham Muzahim writes a piece in Al Monitor on the Islamic group, a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, the first Islamic organisation in Lebanon. The Abdurrahman Group, founded in 1950 in Beirut by Mohammed Omar Daouk, along with a group of Islamists in Tripoli, most notably Fatih Yakan, adopted an Islamic current. Ayyubi confirmed that the Islamic group participated in the first round of elections in Parliament to select a president, but refused to disclose whether its representative, Imad Hout, had voted for Samir Geagea, head of the executive body of the Lebanese Forces Party. Sources close to the Islamic group, however, told Al Monitor that Hout had cast a blank ballot, in contrast to the March 14th alliance, whose members generally voted for Geagea, and which the group has been affiliated. The Islamic group supports Geagea's electoral reform, but also said that it does not have reservations about relations with Geagea, despite his supposed involvement in the assassination of Prime Minister Rashid Karami. Ayyubi said that his party's relationship with the Future movement is governed by a desire to maintain the unity of the Sunni scene in Lebanon. Ayyubi criticised the Future movement's stance in support of the coup in Egypt and said that it contradicted their position on military intervention in Lebanon and Hezbollah's weapons. Relations between the Islamic group and the March 14th coalition, in particular the Future movement, deteriorated following the Egyptian coup because of Saudi and Future movement support for it. The Islamic group no longer participates in March 14th meetings. Ayyubi asserted that the Islamic group is opposed to any Lebanese party joining the fighting in Syria, whether for or against the regime. The Islamic group has supported the Syrian opposition via media outlets and assistance provided for refugees, but has not offered any form of armed support, such as transferring fighters or weapons into Syria. Michael Young writes from Beirut an article titled Samir Geagea and Guilt by Manipulation. The title relates to Geagea and as the presidential candidate and previous prominent warlord receiving signs at Parliament when MPs wrote names of Dr. Geagea's alleged victims on their ballots. That act raised a number of disturbing questions. Those who wrote the names knew what they were doing. They realised that Geagea saw the election as an opportunity to give himself new legitimacy. It is questionable whether several of those named were actually killed by Geagea, but somehow the Lebanese Forces leader, 9 years after his release from prison, cannot seem to escape the stigma of his civil war legacy. Michael Young questions, why is the single former militia leader who has actually spent time in prison, who has apologised for his actions, held up as a distillation of all the evils of the civil war, while other former warlords, many with a record as bad or worse than Geagea's, are regarded as pillars of the state? The writer adds, "It's a tragedy that the Maronite community remains partly a prisoner of Geagea and his rivalry with Michel Aoun, the two men who most contributed to the bloodbath that engulfed the Christians in the 1988 to 1990s are still regarded as the community's principal de facto representatives." It was Geagea's assessment that if the elections were held on the basis of sect, with sects voting solely for candidates of the same sect, Young argues how odd that a man who sought to promote an election law proposal that would have divided Lebanon further, that would have undermined the principle of elections as an instrument of common national interaction, today is presenting himself as a presidential candidate who can best defend the Lebanese state. Geagea seems lost between what he views as Lebanon's national interests and his own parochial political interests, which are often contradictory. What is good for Lebanon is not necessarily good for Samir Geagea and vice versa. The writer adds Geagea is also wrong about the constitutional role of the president. As defender of the nation's unity, the president must, by definition, seek a consensus. But being consensual does not necessarily mean being weak. All this talk of strength and doing battle suggests that the Lebanese Forces leader does not quite realise what the presidency today is all about. Young opted to assess Geagea's candidacy from a political perspective, saying, "Let's judge Geagea by what's that standard, not whether he is a moral paragon. So few people are in our republic, which is why the discussion of Geagea's crimes can sound so contrived." Well, now let's talk to Carl. Michael Young exhibits an interesting assessment of Geagea's candidacy in Lebanon. Carl, what do you think of his argument, especially the one bringing up a comparison between Hezbollah's leader, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah?
I think he didn't actually compare the two persons, as in the actual person. He more compared their tone and their stance when it comes to hinting at a possible war that could happen, and the tone of voice that Hassan Nasrallah has when he does his speeches, and that's obviously directed towards Israel. So as compared to Dr. Geagea's stance against the other parties, including Hezbollah and even the Syrian president, many think that while he's a little bit on the diplomatic side in his tone, you could still see that he's very, very clear about his stance against Syria and against Hezbollah, that he doesn't want to be a consensual president, and he has an agenda to stop Hezbollah from having their arms.
And do you agree with Michael Young that Geagea is also wrong about the constitutional role of the president? Young argues that as defender of the nation's unity, the president must by definition seek a consensus, while Geagea assumes that a consensual president is inherently weak.
I think I would argue against Geagea when it comes to that. A consensual president is not necessarily weak, and definitely not weak. If he's a strong consensual president, then he's a strong president. The fact that he's consensual doesn't mean that he is weak.
Well, we'll wrap it up there. And to see more, please visit levant.tv. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.